And so you always have to integrate it, not only physically, but culturally into the people themselves.
Mhm.
And kind of my overall point is that each shiny new object is usually a point solution to a system problem.
Mhm.
And it must be incorporated into all of the elements of the culture, the physical, the emotional, even as far as being integrated into your customer's acceptance of it.
Mhm.
A lot of times these computerized systems impact on the process itself.
Mhm.
And very often that might require approval from your customer to change it.
Mhm.
These items, when you put them all together, come to play in what I call the emerging technology hype cycle.
Mhm.
And let me show you that for just a sec. You've seen this, Doc, I know. But what the hype cycle is it's a graph of expectations
Mhm.
on the y-axis over time.
Mhm.
And so when people first look at some new piece of innovation or technology,
Mhm.
okay, immediately their expectations take off like a rocket. Now there's tons of little pieces of examples in here that are put on this timeline, and I'm going to ask you to ignore that and just look at the overall shape, if you would.
Mhm.
But what happens is early on expectations are very, very high.
Mhm.
But as people get along, pretty soon they realize we need some hardware. We need to change the way we're training. We need to change our software. We need to, oh my goodness, we need to change this. We need to change that. And pretty soon when reality creeps in on them, they
Mhm.
say, holy mackerel, we've got a lot of stuff we've got to do to make this shiny new object productive.
Mhm.
And so they go through all of this learning and this trial and error and this expectation. And then finally they get to the point they say, aha, we're making it work.
Mhm.
Now it's working. Okay.
Mhm.
And they can take off. And if that's your environment, okay, and you're using problem solving by engineers, for example,
Mhm.
engineers and managers, you're going to have a curve like that.
Mhm.
If you've got a true Kaizen culture, which is what we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
now this curve looks a little bit different. It probably doesn't go down here. It goes more like this. And if you've got a really, really healthy Kaizen culture, it goes like this.
Okay. Can I just interpret based on
Please.
the Kaizen mindset part one that we said? The blue line, when the engineers come into play using the technology, they're comfortable with that, and they tried implementing it. You get into the line, the red line, just above that or more above that. That is, you are establishing a new standard, right? The one that you spoke about in
Yes.
Kaizen mindset. In
Mhm.
when you are improving the standards, right? By
Yes.
we called it a Kaizen event at that point of time, but here we are just talking the same thing with the use of technology that you raise the standard up. Am I
Yes.
gathering it right?
Exactly. Yes. You're reading that exactly right. And if you have everybody involved in the Kaizen mindset,
Mhm.
you can get to the point where this curve accelerates.
Mhm.
And MarTechs Law, there's Moore's law, there's Eroom's law, okay, but this is what's called Kurzweil's law.
Mhm.
And Kurzweil law says that the power of technology
Mhm.
will increase exponentially over time.
Mhm.
And even when some technology dies out,
Mhm.
like the power of the microchip,
Mhm.
okay, something will come along to replace it.
Mhm.
And he's shown 3 or 4 or 5 times in history where that's happened.
Mhm.
Okay? And that's Kurzweil's law.
Mhm.
Okay? Moore's law was that the power of computing doubles, actually the number of transistors double every year, every 2 years, I guess.
Mhm.
I can't remember. And And Kurzweil law is the same thing about computing power.
Mhm.
But they all of those things take this same curve,
Mhm.
and there's a reason that takes this curve.
Mhm.
And we haven't talked about this very much yet, but the reason they take this curve is what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Uh-huh.
Now, oops, pardon me. Okay. Dunning and Kruger were psychologists, behavioral psychologists, cognitive psychologists.
Mhm.
And they gave people, they noticed that people who were not particularly skilled
Mhm.
at some field may be very confident in their ability to do it.
Mhm.
And then they found out that as people got more and more skilled, sometimes they became less confident.
Mhm.
Okay. And so they did a series of tests, and this is what they found out.
Mhm.
They found out that they placed confidence on this scale
Mhm.
and experience-based knowledge on this scale.
Mhm.
And one of the tests that they did is they gave people a very simple thing to explain.
Mhm.
They you know, Professor Kruger might come up to you and say, Dr. M, can you explain to me how a toilet works?
Mhm.
Okay. And so you would explain it in some fashion or another. Okay. Then Professor Kruger would take you over here and show you how a toilet works.
Mhm.
Or he would ask you a series of questions.
Mhm.
And he would say, why does the water start and then stop? And you might say, well, the size of the tank empties.
Mhm.
You say, okay, but why does the water level come back up to the same point?
Mhm.
Okay. And when you flush the water, why does the toilet first fill up and then empty? And so when people started learning about a toilet, okay, pardon me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So they would evaluate how much they knew about a toilet.
Mhm.
Then they would teach them about a toilet
Mhm.
a little bit,
Mhm.
and then ask them, now, how much do you know?
Mhm.
And what they found out was that when people didn't know very much about a toilet,
Mhm.
they could be very, very confident
Mhm.
about their knowledge. In other words, this is a piece of cake. I get this. It's no problem. Okay. But then when you ask them a question, say, well, why does the water come up to the same level all the time?
Mhm.
They'd say, well, I really don't know.
Mhm.
And why does the water level raise and then sink and then come back up to the same level?
Mhm.
And they don't understand the gooseneck effect and the siphon effect and that type of stuff. But if they teach it and you keep asking them questions, they figure out they know less and less and less.
Mhm.
Actually, they know more, but they're less confident.
Mhm.
And then pretty soon, when they get to a point where they learn a lot about it, okay, and they get by that, oh, okay, some of this might be a little tricky when you ask them about the water level, and you explain that. And then you ask them about the siphon effect, and they say, geez, there's a lot more to this than I thought. Okay. And pretty soon, when you show them and they work with it, then they do some stuff, and maybe they have to unplug their toilet, who knows what, they say, wow, this is complicated. And then they start to learn. And as they learn and practice and study and reflect, now they get more and more confident. But here's the point. The most talented people are not 100% confident.
Mhm.
They know there's something more out there. Okay. Now, it is not coincidental that this curve follows the hype curve.
Mhm.
Notice it's about the same shape.
Mhm.
And the reason is to get beyond this trough here,
Mhm.
you actually have to learn how it works.
Mhm.
You have to learn how it works.
Mhm.
Okay. Oops, pardon me, going the wrong way. Okay. So now let me
Yeah.
see if I
Go ahead. No. I like this because after doing my PhD, I I felt so foolish of a lot of things that I thought I knew, right? I was very confident, and I've changed my hypothesis a couple of times. And it took me 6 years. I quit that 3 times, and I said, I can't do it. And I can relate it, and I'm just laughing at it, at myself, because I have experienced this. And I like the way you put it. And the curve also does resemble what you said about the technological hype too. I mean, I was just imagining my plight on this curve. And then when you showed me that, I said, let me see this again. Sorry for that.
No, no problem, Doc. And the reason, one of the reasons that these have the same curve have a lot to do with management egos, and how things really get done in a business. Now imagine that you're the manager of a large firm and you're going to go out and you're going to buy a $5 million ERP system. Okay. Well, everybody in the management ranks is talking about it. Okay. Now in the management ranks, almost surely they don't know very much about it, but they quickly scoot up this curve right up here. And they get up here very quickly. And the way they get up there very quickly is the CEO is talking to the COO, and neither one of them know too much about it, but they both know the jargon. And then they talk
jargon,
and they talk to the CFO, and they're talking about, you know, expectations and planning cycles and sales buckets and marketing buckets, and they start talking about all this jargon that they go, but they really don't have a deep understanding of it. Unfortunately, because they sound like they know what they're talking about, and no one really wants to admit that they don't know it, all these people in the C-suite reinforce each other. And pretty soon they actually believe they do understand it. Okay.
Can I hold you there?
Yeah.
I'll hold you there. Okay, this takes me back decades, and when we started saying that for something that we don't know, I repeat that again, for something that we don't know, we give it a name, and then we become so familiar with the name that we think we know what it is. So that's what it looks like.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so so very often the managers who have only a superficial understanding of their ERP system and don't know how it interacts, okay, sound like they know what they're doing. And when your boss sounds like he knows what he's doing, the last thing he wants you to do is come up and say, hey boss, you really don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't get very much traction. Okay. And so here's where, as a change agent, you've got to become, you have to have the ability to be seen as being weird. Because when you go to the boss, you have to tell him he doesn't understand this fully. And you have to tell him in a fashion that is emotionally compatible with his self-image. Okay. But you still have to be weird. You have to be weird enough to cause him to want to change, to cause him to want to understand it, to cause him to grasp it. And as he understands it, he starts scooting down this curve. And as he starts to understand it, his confidence is reduced in terms of what he really knows. But he's more powerful. Okay. And finally, when he gets down to this range here, when he gets enough experience-based knowledge, okay, then he can manage in a proper fashion to cause the changes to occur. And so when that happens here, then you start making progress. So the curve has the same shape. And the reason it has the same shape is that both of them are a reflection of management behaviors. Both of them reflect management behaviors. Dunning-Kruger, it's impressive. There's another thing that happens too. As you know, I've been studying this psychologist by the name of Daniel Kahneman,
Mhm.
and Daniel is absolutely brilliant. As a matter of fact, he got a Nobel Prize in economics
Mhm.
for the work that he did
Mhm.
on decision making.
Mhm.
And what he found out was that people don't make decisions like most people are taught to make decisions.
Mhm.
And he came up with a principle called prospect theory.
Mhm.
And basically it has to do with how people view risks.
Mhm.
Okay. And let me give you one quick example. One of the studies they did was they had a company, and people bought lottery tickets, and they got 50 people to buy lottery tickets, and once a week they would come by and they would give them lottery tickets.
Mhm.
And then they did this for several weeks, and then they split the group in half.
Mhm.
And one half they just handed the lottery tickets out to,
Mhm.
and the other half they let them select the lottery ticket.
Mhm.
So they'd look at the numbers on it, and okay. So then um, one week, okay, they went through that process.
Mhm.
Only they had 50 more people that wanted to join.
Mhm.
Only these 50 people had to go buy the lottery tickets
Mhm.
from the first 50.
Mhm.
And so for this was a $2 lottery ticket.
Mhm.
For the people who were given a lottery ticket,
Mhm.
the average sale price was $2.50.
Mhm.
Some people wanted to keep it, you know, but some people were willing to pay a little bit more.
Mhm.
For the people who had selected their lottery ticket,
Mhm.
the average sale price was $9.
Mhm.
Now, this was a lottery ticket they paid $2 for,
Mhm.
but they picked it.
Mhm.
It had some of their fingerprints on it, so to speak.
Mhm.
It had some ownership. It wasn't just handed to them, they selected it.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's become known as what's called the ownership bias.
Mhm.
And the ownership bias is that you tend to overvalue things that you yourself use, that you yourself made. Okay.
Mhm.
And when it comes to making decisions, okay, that turns out to be a big deal. You know, let's take, for example, in a plant, you've seen this, I've seen this, in a plant where I go in and the plant manager's been there for 10 years.
Mhm.
I know that changing things is going to be really hard.
Mhm.
Why? Because that management system he's worked with for 10 years.
Mhm.
He designed it. It's got his fingerprints on it.
Mhm.
It's what I call his baby.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if I show up when the plant manager's just been replaced,
Mhm.
I know I can change things much more rapidly.
True.
Why? Because he doesn't have ownership in it.
Mhm.
Okay. And I like to say to the first manager, he does this management system is his baby.
Mhm.
And a consultant like you or I show up, and we got to tell him his baby's ugly,
Mhm.
you know, and nobody wants to hear that their baby's ugly, you know.
Mhm.
But the other person, it's not their baby. It's just something that we work with. Okay.
Mhm.
And Kahneman and Tversky, who was his partner in this work, developed, and they tied it to prospect theory.
You need to write that name down in your beautiful handwriting so that all of us can see it. You have a beautiful handwriting. How do you manage this?
Oops. Daniel Kahneman. And his most famous book is called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. Okay. And thinking fast is the type of decisions that we make, probably the majority of the decisions that we make. You know, am I going to go to the store? Yes or no? Am I going to, whatever you happen to do, and managers make a lot of them in a meeting.
Mhm.
You know, Are we going to ship to the customer? Are we going to work overtime? They make these decisions. Okay. And there's two ways to do. There's what he calls system one, which is fast, and system two, which is slow. And slow is rational and deliberate. Okay.
Mhm.
You gather all the facts, you put them together, you
Mhm.
know, do if then thinking. And very often that's how decision making is taught. In reality, that's not how it occurs.
Mhm.
Okay. Very often the decision making is very fast.
Mhm.
Okay. And when you make decisions fast, you use a mechanism that Kahneman has coined, and it's called what you see is all there is. What you see is all there is. In other words, that's what you're
What you
dealing with.
see is all there is. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you're a manager
Mhm.
and you're learning about your ERP system,
Mhm.
and somebody has given you a quick little tour through it,
Mhm.
what you see is all there is. That's all you're aware of.
Mhm.
That's the extent, that's your world of ERP.
Mhm.
Okay. And very often people don't have the background
Mhm.
to say, okay, what could go wrong? What about maintenance? What about training? What about hardware?
Mhm.
What about, do we need a climate controlled server room?
Mhm.
They don't know to ask those questions because what you see is all there is. It's a technique that's used in sales. You know, salesmen don't tell you everything about a product.
Mhm.
They tell you it's good.
Mhm.
Why? So what you see is all there is in your mind when you're making that decision.
Mhm.
This stuff that Kahneman and his partner was even smarter than him. His name was Amos Tversky. Amos has since passed away. He died at an early age. He died at 59 or something like that, like maybe 20 years ago. But these two guys are just off the charts brilliant.
Mhm.
And it applies to what we're doing. And maybe that's why he got a Nobel Prize for it.
Mhm.
But that's one of the reasons why you see this hype cycle and why it follows the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mhm.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
Yep.
Questions, Doc?
No, let me digest this, but one thing for sure, that I could have retained 1/3 of the clients that I've lost have I met you earlier, because it was the plant manager who sabotaged me. Okay, it was his baby that I was flirting around with. So thanks
Well,
a
and
lot.
it's,
We got to have a part 3.
pardon?
We need to have a part 3 of Kaizen mindset.
Yeah. Well, it's we've got a little bit more here on MarTechs Law to talk about yet, but you know, it's there's a story in there too
Yep.
about being a change agent.
Mm.
Okay. If you come into this environment where the manager's been there 10 years and he owns all this system, you can only be a little bit weird.
Mm.
You can't be really weird
Mhm.
because he's not willing to change very much.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if you come in and somebody up high has said, hey, we got to make big changes, and they change out the manager and bring in some new thinking, now you can be a whole lot more weird.
Mhm.
Okay. And so a good change agent recognizes that.
Mhm.
They recognize the ability and the intentions and the interest in the organization's change.
Mhm.
And those things can't be overlooked.
Mhm.
That's why, you know, when I'm teaching, whoever I'm teaching,
Mhm.
my overall guiding principle is this. IAD. It all depends. You know, should I push the organization this far? Well, it all depends. How old is the system? How old are the people? How much ownership do they have? You know, can I get by with this? Well, it all depends, you know, and the thing about it all depends is that it's true. Okay. But even more important than that is that the only way you can answer that it all depends is with experience. It's all based on experience-based knowledge. And if you've got the experience, you can be very, very helpful. Now, you need some other things. Experience itself is not sufficient.
Mhm.
My mentor one time told me, Lonnie, never, ever forget that there's a difference between 20 years of experience
Mhm.
and 20 one-year experiences.
Mhm.
And when you're dealing with somebody, when you first deal with them, you really don't know if they have 20 years of experience or 21-year experiences. They've just been doing the same thing, for 20 years. And so in the grand scheme of things, IAD, Dr. M.
Yeah, that's true. But there's one
Okay.
interesting point that you made when we were talking of the 14 principles that Jeffrey Licker pointed out in Toyota Way. And we talked about the point number 8, if I'm not mistaken, when you said adopt the technology suitable for the people and the process. You did remark on that it should be tried at a place. It should be more like a ripple than a tsunami, to that effect, if you can clarify on that.
Yeah, well, when most of these changes are implemented,
Mhm.
one of the things that I see is this.
Mhm.
The perception is out of perspective. The benefits are overvalued and the other issues are often ignored.
Mhm.
Okay. And maybe they're not ignored, maybe they're just undervalued.
Mhm.
Okay. But they create problems as you move forward.
Mhm.
Okay. And if you're not prepared to take on those problems,
Mhm.
then you're going to get into big trouble.
Mhm.
And so how do you learn about this? Well, the way you learn about this is on a small scale.
Mhm.
I mean, chefs know this. No chef is going to create a banquet and put something out there he's done for the first time.
Mhm.
He's going to try it. If only just making one serving of it for himself and tasting it.
Mhm.
Okay. But in manufacturing, we're so want to do it globally and get all the benefits. Okay.
Mhm.
And in our speed, in our hurriedness to get all the benefits, we are missing this point here.
Mhm.
And so what we implement it across the board, but it's only 70% of what we need.
Mhm.
Now we have to go back in all of these locations, in all of these places and modify them. And then we learn some more. And then we have to go back and modify them again and again and again.
Mhm.
Well, the Toyota process is to do it small, do it locally under as controlled a condition as you can, okay?
Mhm.
And then logically expand it.
Mhm.
Now, logically expanding it may be doing it small and then doing the whole boat, if that's what makes sense.
Mhm.
But usually you go in steps. You try something, you've got a new machine, you try it at one cell.
Mhm.
You work out the details, you figure out what the maintenance needs to be,
Mhm.
what kind of support you need for that machine, okay?
Mhm.
And then you say, well, this is one cell in a value stream. Let's try it in the whole value stream.
Mhm.
And it works in the value stream. And pretty soon you can say, hey, let's try it on all of the processes that are like this.
Mhm.
And so that's what I really think Professor Leiker is discussing there about implementing these things. Okay. And I think that's what he says, use proven technology. Okay. Proving it is a stepwise function.
Mhm.
The fact that somebody else used it
Mhm.
in some other environment, on some other processes, in some other industry is not very impressive.
Mhm.
Okay. But if you can use it on your processes, in your products, with your people, in your plant, that's a different story. So how do you do it? You start small and build up.
That makes sense, yeah.
So let me see. Okay. One of the other things that MarTech law talks about is this dramatic change. Okay. When somebody figures out how to change from here to here, And he cites Amazon, Google. I talk about technology changes like digital watches. I think the manufacturing industry in Japan is another example of that. They went from no change to rather dramatic change and are now a world manufacturing power. And they still do not have the typical set of resources that you would expect out of an industrial power. They don't have steel, they don't have oil, they don't have bauxite, okay? They don't have iron. Their mines are very, very minor, okay? But they have learned how to leverage people and management skill to become a world manufacturing power. One of the things that I first heard from Dr. Deming when I took a class from him is he said he was personally embarrassed because he was doing some work in Japan and he found out that they were taking scrap steel that they bought from the United States, transporting it all the way to Japan, refining it into steel, and then selling the steel back to the United States. He said that should embarrass us into getting better. And that was like 1985, maybe something like that. But the Japanese figured out how to do that. Okay. And the funny thing, Dr. M, is I find a lot of my clients don't want to use these things and they call them Japanese techniques. What they really don't realize is the vast majority of these techniques were techniques taught to them by American teachers. Deming and Duran taught them about total quality management. I think it was Feigenbaum that went and taught them about total productive maintenance. MacArthur and the Army used after action reports. They used the model of after action reports for what they call hindsight today. Okay. The concept of a small work team is built upon the US military's use of corporals and sergeants to run small groups of teams. Be it a rifle team. A rifle team is 3 riflemen and a corporal to lead them, an NCO. And then there's 2 rifle teams to a squad. Okay. They use that same principle of close supervision in their plant. They call them team leaders. They're there to do what the non-commissioned officer is designed to do, to teach these people. Okay. And so they have taken these techniques, even the technique of SMED. People talked about SMED being revolutionary. When I first saw SMED, I said, wait a minute. I was doing this in Chevron 15 years ago. We used that same principle to schedule work in what we call turnarounds, in maintenance turnarounds. And we had a piece of software called CPS, Critical Path Scheduling, that we had bought from IBM. And back in those days, you know, we filled out these punch cards.
Yeah, that's right.
And we had the resources that we had, how many people, how many cranes, how many welders, how many boilermakers, the tools that we had, the work that needed to be done was all put together in a flow chart. And then it all went into the computer and the computer would spit it out. But it was nothing more than SMED. Okay. We called it critical path scheduling. All of these things that you see coming out of Japan, I shouldn't say all of them, but a ton of them were American techniques that traveled to Japan via experts, taught to the Japanese. And now as people are trying to mimic them, they call them Japanese techniques and they resist using them. Where here is where they started. I think the irony is overwhelming, you know. The other one is the way they're trained. The way they were trained was designed based on what was called the TWI, the Training Within Industries organization. And today, if you go into a Honda or you go into a Toyota plant, they use a job breakdown sheet to teach these people how to work. And that job breakdown sheet came straight out of the TWI JI job instruction manual. Okay. Now, starting about 2005 or 2010, the TWI process got a real shot of energy in it here in the United States, and people are starting to use it now. Okay. But 20 years ago, they didn't. 30 years ago, they didn't. Okay. And when it came back, people said, well, this was a Japanese method. It wasn't. It was, pardon me, it was designed in the United States. Okay. But when MacArthur went to Japan, and one of his jobs was to rebuild Japan after the war, he brought those people over there and they taught the Japanese. And the only difference was they learned it, they practiced it, and they used it. Okay. They used the techniques of Deming. They used the techniques of Duran. They used the techniques of the people who came out of Bell Laboratories, people like Homer Sarason and Charlie Protzman. And now we call them Japanese techniques, and we resist using them. It boggles the mind. But I've got on this list, you probably have a question, why do I have Rolex watches on the list?
Yep.
Well, you know, Rolex for years has been the hallmark, the world class of watches. And to be honest with you, I don't even know how good a watch they are. All I know is they're really, really expensive. You know, it's nothing to pay $15,000 for a Rolex watch. But Rolex watches were unaffected. First, there was the move from mainspring watches into quartz watches. And I think Omega was the leader in that. Okay. And then once digital watches came along, I mean, you can buy a great timepiece, you know, for $1.98. But Rolex still charged $15,000. And I like to use them as an example because Rolex does not sell watches. They manufacture watches. But what they really sell is prestige. They sell exclusivity. They sell ego. If you've got a Rolex watch, you've got a ton of money and everybody knows it. Okay. And you know that everybody knows it. So the mechanical thing is not the issue with the Rolex watch. Okay. Anyway,
That's interesting. I mean, there are certain people that we will not tell this story to in my family.
Okay, but let's wrap this up with kind of my impression of MarTechs Law and what it really means and what we can glean from it. And my point is this: it's simple and it's straightforward. Technological improvements are interesting, but they are not the limitation to continuous improvement. Okay. And I guess even MarTechs Law says that. There's a lot more technological opportunities than there are people capturing them. Okay. So why aren't we capturing them? Well, some of them may not be worthwhile. Okay. But even at that, I think there's all kinds of things out there that are worthwhile. I'd like to see people really use their ERP systems. I have worked with some people, driven that point, and it's helped them immensely. Okay. But the limitation is how we utilize the people in our organization. Okay. It always has been the limitation, and it always will be the limitation, because nothing really happens without the people. Okay. So many people think innovation are gonna do these things. Innovation doesn't do much of anything at all. Innovation creates the opportunity so people can do things. Ultimately, somebody's doing something. Okay. And the key is not so much the amount of technology you have or the amount of technology that's available to be used, but have you in your business created an environment where it is possible for everyone to perform to their maximum ability, so that they then can become the best versions of themselves. If you have that environment, people are naturally driven to do the best they can. I mean, I know there's a lot of managers who disagree with that, but the truth of the matter was McGregor back in the 60s debunked it with his theory X and theory Y managers. It's a well-accepted principle, but people deep down still believe you got to drive people with fear and threats. Okay. But that's simply not true. That's not true. Okay. If you, on the other hand, create this environment, these fully engaged workers will pull in the technology that works in their business. They will maximize the utility of this innovation and technology.
Mhm.
A fully engaged worker is one who acts like he owns the business.
Mhm.
They're engaged physically, they're committed physically, they're working hard. They're committed intellectually. They've got their mind in the game, they're problem solving, and they've got their heart in the game. Okay, they're committed emotionally. So these people who are physically, intellectually, and emotionally committed are engaged. And those fully engaged people will then act like they own the business, and they'll say, ha, we could use that technology, or we could use that technology, but it's too expensive. Okay, whatever it is, they will pull it in and they will maximize it and they will make it work and they will fit it into your culture, into their culture. Okay. If you do not have that environment, nothing else matters. You'll be mediocre at best. Okay. Now you may survive, but you only survive because the other people are doing the same thing that you're doing. Okay. The statistic that I like to quote at this point is General Motors. In the United States in 1955, General Motors had 60%. That's 60% of the automobile market. 6 out of every 10 cars that was on the road in the United States at that time was a General Motors car. The last time I checked, in 2021, they had 9.8%. Why is that? Because they continued to do what they were doing and other people changed. Okay. In 1955, you couldn't find a Honda or a Toyota in the United States. Now there are a couple of the biggest selling cars on the market. 20 years ago, you couldn't find a Kia or a Hyundai. Now the Koreans have entered the market. Okay. And it's not because they have some special juice or great resources. Au contraire, neither Japan nor Korea have the resources the United States have. How is it that they can impinge upon the US market? That's why they've created an environment where they get far more out of their workers. They get dozens of Kaizens a week instead of one a month. Okay. And I like to say it's all about the science of workforce engagement. If you as a manager understand the science of workforce engagement, if you practice it, if you preach it, if you teach it, okay, then your people will act as a mass that will collectively go out and find these technological improvements. They act like they own the business. They want it to be better. And they will treat technological improvements just like they would treat quality improvements and delivery improvements. They're just another parameter to optimize. To me, it's all about the people.
Yep.
And I don't know if I've told you this, Doc, I presume I have at some point in time. But when I was a young manager, my mentor told me one thing I have never forgotten. He said, Lonnie, take care of your people and they will take care of everything else.
Mhm.
And I think that's the message. And if you do take care of your people, they'll take care of the technology as well. And so while I agree with Scott Brinker, that there's a gap, I don't think the gap is working with the technology. I think the gap is working with the people and getting the maximum leverage. And then you can close that gap. And by working with the people, I mean the technology managers working with their people, as well as the manufacturing managers working with their people.
Mhm.
Because the gap is at both sides.
Mhm.
The technology people aren't teaching the people how to apply it.
Mhm.
And the people who are manufacturing don't know enough about the theory.
Mhm.
There needs to be a meeting of the minds.
Makes sense.
And I'm reminded of a band. I'm a creature of the 60s. I graduated from college in 69, so I went through this revolution. And there was a British band called The Who. And this was from one of their songs where they say, I tip my hat to the new Constitution, take a bow for the new revolution, smile and grin at the change all around, but I pick up my guitar and play just like yesterday. Then I get on my knees and pray we don't get fooled again. Everything is changing. There's no question about that. But some of the things are the same, just like yesterday. Pardon me.
Well, that's good. Amazing. So that's great. Thank you very much.
Well, Doc, this has really been enjoyable. I like it.
I enjoyed it too.
I always enjoy chatting with you about this stuff, and all of this started with you asking me a question.
Yeah, because
I love questions too.
yeah, I liked. Well, all this started with Mark Carnell, who's also in Texas, but down there, San Antonio. We did CADENCE, the Life in the Fast Lane. I think that was some song sung by Eagles. And we talked about CADENCE. We did part 1, part 2, part 3. And that's how Mike Carnell talked about, introduced this concept. And then I have been talking to people to find out how to bridge the gap. So we'll be talking more about it. I mean, we give them a flavor on the Kaizen mindset and the Kaizen mindset required for this, which is more or less the same. It all depends on, as you said, the people, and engage the people will pull it down for you from both the ends. For the technology, they'll push it down to the earth, and the earth beings will pull it down from the technology people.
There's an article I've got on my website, Dr. M, and it's called The Uncomfortable Dance Between IT and Manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some headbutting that goes on between those two groups. And I've got, to be honest with you, some deep understanding of it. But I wish we'd quit doing it. I wish we'd spend more time working together. And I think this uneasy dance between manufacturing and technology is hurting both of them. The technology people aren't learning enough about what really works in manufacturing and what they want. And the manufacturing people aren't taking advantage of all of the great theory and tools that the technologists come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a matter of getting those groups together,
Mm-hmm.
getting them in some dialogue. And so I don't know exactly how you do that, but Dr. Deming talked about that frequently when he talked about melding theory with practice. And I think it's just a very fertile area for a lot of opportunities. But let me thank you again for.
Well, thank you
this.
very much. And you can move off the screen so that we can wave to each other and then stop recording.
Yeah, but before you do that, I want to tell you that unlike you, I have 12 more hours of Father's Day to celebrate. And I think your clock has just gone to Monday morning, has it not?
Yes, it is 14 minutes into Monday morning.
And I thank you for that. And I thank you for staying up and.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Right,
We'll talk to you soon.
We'll meet you again. A lot of things to talk to you. Okay.
You bet. You have a good day, Dr. M.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.